Halo guys, kita bersama-sama lagi. Kali ini saya Iwan, Ahmad Sudirwan bersama tamu yang istimewa, Mr. Bill Birtles. Pak Bill Birtles adalah Bureau Chief ABC Australia. Pak Bill, nice to have you on our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much that you would accept our invitation.
Sure.
Pak Bill.
Thank you.
So, as the Bureau Chief of ABC Australia, you've been here for over a year now, right?
About a year, yeah.
About a year. With your previous experiences, including a posting in China,
Yes.
and then after that in Taiwan, right?
Yes.
Two countries, particularly China, which has, of course, certain relations with Indonesia, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As you can imagine.
Yep.
I think also with Australia, in certain ways.
Yeah.
China has become such a what would we call a gigantic country?
Yeah. Superpower.
Superpower.
Yeah.
So you've been here now for a while. How do you actually see the differences between, from a journalist perspective in China, covering events in China, which is not necessarily the same, in my opinion, with Indonesia. Indonesia is, of course, a democracy. China may not necessarily a democracy according to Western concept, right? So please tell us first, what are the major differences, Pak Bill?
For a journalist, what's kind of surprising, I guess, for me, is that China, of course, somewhat inward-looking, but if you look at their domestic media, which is all state-controlled, it nonetheless has a huge amount of news about America, Japan, to some extent maybe Southeast Asia or Europe. Now, a lot of all of this news basically is filtered through the government's narrative. But in Indonesia, a country that is actually huge in population compared to Australia and compared to most countries, I guess I was not expecting the media environment here, the public discussion here, to be so kind of domestic focused, but it really is in Indonesia.
Inwardly looking, actually.
If you watch all the news channels or you read the news websites, people are discussing news and what's going on in Indonesia, as you'd expect, are not seeing a great deal of discussion about what's going on in the rest of Asia or the US or anywhere else. Now, that's not a bad thing, but it's quite a difference that, as a journalist, you notice. So that's one of the first things, I guess. Australia is right next to Indonesia. A lot of Australians wonder why there's not more interaction between Australia and Indonesia, not including Bali, obviously. When I'm here, I get it a bit more because I feel within Indonesia itself, there's a bit of discussion about China because of investment and stuff like that. But there's not a huge amount of interest, I guess, in Australia or perhaps other parts of the world. That's not everybody. But I say that compared to my experience in China, in Taiwan, in Australia. So that's a big difference I've noticed.
Hold there for a while, Bill. So kita akan tanya pada Pak Bill Birtles, perspektif seorang jurnalis dari sebuah negara barat, dalam hal ini Australia, yang sesungguhnya merupakan tetangga terdekat Indonesia, tentang perkembangan politik yang lebih mutakhir dari saat ini. Pak Bill, now talking about Indonesia's more current political situation, let's say, or political development that Indonesia has just experienced the latest presidential election. We know that the presidential candidate Prabowo Subianto and his vice presidential candidate Gibran Rakabuming have been leading in the quick counting or results so far, above those figures of Anies Baswedan and Muhaimin Iskandar, and the other ones, Ganjar Pranowo and Mahfud MD. How do you see actually this development whereby Prabowo has been known as a seasoned politician with his certain background, of course, in the military, etc., right? On the other hand, many Indonesians have yet shown their trust now on Prabowo rather than the other candidates. And then the fact, although the Indonesian National General Election Commission have yet to make the official announcement on the results, but of course, as we know, the public and the international world already quote unquote acknowledge Prabowo has become indeed the president. Your views, please.
Well, I think the expectation is that his victory was so large that no matter what challenges there are,
it's almost 59%, right?
Yeah, it makes it hard to believe that any challenge would be successful in overturning the result. And if there was, you imagine there would be all sorts of
on paper it's almost impossible.
So I think overseas the expectation is that he will be the next president. That's the first thing. The second thing is, he's been, ever since he was made defense minister by President Joko Widodo, what was it, 2019, I think, or 2020, he became defense minister. He's back basically in the establishment
2019, when he became defense minister.
So he's been back in basically the establishment of the Indonesian government, in the cabinet now for quite a few years. So I think countries like Australia have become accustomed to dealing with Defence Minister Prabowo Subianto. We had Australia's Deputy Prime Minister just here recently again meeting Prabowo Subianto in Jakarta. So I think the expectation from overseas is that, particularly with the very obvious endorsement of the current president, that Prabowo is going to be a continuity president. There are people in Indonesia who obviously understand this country a lot better than I do, who are a bit more worried that he will shake things up, and they're particularly worried about whether or not he has a sufficient commitment to democracy, because of course many people here talk about over the past 10 years a democratic backsliding under Joko Widodo. But I think overseas, the fact that the incumbent clearly supported him and has his son with him is being interpreted, at least I'd say in Australia, as we're not going to have surprises with Prabowo Subianto. I think that's the expectation from the Australian government and probably the broader region.
Also perhaps it also reflects the expectation of the Australian general public or Australian people that there would be a better option for Australia to see Prabowo becomes the next president of Indonesia, for that continuity reasoning.
I feel because of the reporting over many years about Prabowo Subianto's past in the military and then during the protests in 97, 98 in Jakarta, discharge from the military, all that background is well known in Australia. For that reason, I don't think it's surprising to anybody. I do think people look at his background and do kind of wonder where his kind of popularity comes from. Because obviously he's had a big base for a long time, but it's kind of hard to reconcile given the sort of past allegations against him. But he has answered those questions many times, so somewhat answered them. So I can understand why in Indonesia many people look at that and they say, well, we're willing to kind of move forward, move on. I think in Australia many people might be a little bit confused about the basis of his popularity given his history, but they also know that he's been on the scene for a long time. He's been part of the current cabinet now for the past few years. And for that reason, to be honest, it probably wouldn't matter who wins the election officially. Most Australians aren't paying a great deal of attention to domestic politics.
That's the reality now?
The vast majority probably, to be honest, wouldn't know.
Which in a way makes your job a bit difficult as well.
A little bit more difficult. But for those who, do foreign policy and business and so forth, I don't think there are any issues on the horizon that makes anybody in Australia particularly concerned about the next 5 years, whether it's Prabowo or anybody else.
Bill, we understand that many leaders have already extended their congratulatory words, congratulating actually Prabowo from, of course, the China leader, Russian leader, Mr. Putin, Turkish leader, Mr. Erdogan, also your Prime Minister, Mr. Anthony Albanese, already congratulated Prabowo on his victory. And maybe we have yet to hear from the US side whether they would actually congratulate Prabowo soon. what we heard from the sources from the White House that the U.S. would rather wait until the official result announced by the Indonesian Elections Commission. But of course, all these facts that leaders from around the world have already congratulated Prabowo show indeed the kind of trust to Prabowo that he would be the right leader for Indonesia in respect to particularly the geopolitical handling that would involve Indonesia and of course the interest of other countries around Indonesia, in particular Australia.
Look, I think, to be honest, whoever was elected, particularly Australian leaders, are going to congratulate them because there's a good interest in Australia for Indonesian democracy.
It's not just because Prabowo more preferable due to his military background and him being more experienced.
I wouldn't say they take a preference on who's more preferable. I think it's more a case of Australians, those who are decision makers, and they want to see democracy flourish as much as possible in Indonesia. And Prabowo was emphatically elected this time around to a point where any challenge to legitimacy is unlikely to overturn a win that big. So I think you're going to have Australian leaders, but other foreign leaders, congratulating the winner of a democratic election if it's a clear outcome, partly reflecting the sort of support that many have for Indonesian democracy abroad. It's in many countries' interests, I guess, to make sure that there is a clear and a fair winner. Now, I know there's a process after the election, but it was a very emphatic victory. As for who would they prefer as leader, I honestly don't think in, say, Australia, there would be a preference as to the leader, because even the candidate, Anies Baswedan, who seemed to break the most with Joko Widodo's policies, even on the issue of the region, there isn't a great difference between his positions, Prabowo's positions, Ganjar's positions, right? Because the election wasn't about foreign policy. So for that reason, whether it's Prabowo or anybody else, it probably will be Prabowo, I think Australia would be welcoming. Australia, I think, would be hoping to see, or very happy to see, an election where it wasn't marred by violence in the aftermath. Not yet, at least. Hopefully not. And for that reason, I think Prabowo Subianto is a very well-known figure now in Australia, including warts and all, including his past. And I would expect the Australian side and probably other regional leaders already are very familiar with him and know who they're going to be dealing with.
Great insights, Pak Bill. My last question, Bill. Now that some people in Indonesia, or some some supporters of Prabowo's rivals already try to contest the results of the presidential elections by calling on the Indonesian parliament to start the inquiry process of the elections counting. That will be decided, as far as I know, that will be decided when the parliament resumes its session on March the 1st. And the Indonesian people will know then whether the inquiry, so-called hak angket in Indonesian, will go on or not. But many people on the other side still believe that, as you put it, that Prabowo's win is in fact an emphatic win. So many people also so far still believe that regardless this inquiry by the parliament, that Prabowo will somehow still win the election. So if in this upcoming months there will be some sort of development within the parliament process, that some corner Indonesia might be fearing of certain kind of uncertainty or even unrest. How would you see this from the Australian perspective?
Well, I think last time around there was unrest in 2019 when Prabowo Subianto didn't win. His supporters were on the streets.
I was on the street as well, covering events. And so I knew how it happened.
This is the thing, right? I mean, wouldn't be that surprising to observers overseas if there was some unrest in the aftermath of an Indonesian presidential election. I don't think anybody would particularly want to see that. However, it wouldn't be particularly surprising if the quick count result was closer.
Yeah.
I think you would have seen more caution from foreign leaders.
Because it's so tight, right?
Yeah, but because it was such a large victory, I think even if some of the allegations about the fairness of the process, if there are findings that there were some problems, I think the assumption probably is that it wouldn't overturn the result because the gap was so big between Prabowo and the next candidate, Anies.
So one thing, the allegations on one hand, and probably in your opinion that it won't overturn the findings will not overturn the results.
I don't know, but I think the expectation overseas is that the result was so large that even if there are findings that there were problems in the election, it's
of the so-called alleged unfairness, etc., etc.
It's probably unlikely that the result would be an overturning.
Okay,
but we don't know.
Yeah.
But it strikes me that the reason leaders were congratulating Prabowo early on is because they think whatever happens, it's unlikely a victory that large could be overturned without significant trouble. But whether or not, I make no comment on whether the process was fair or not, I don't know.
Of course, yes.
But I'm just looking at why are all the leaders of most countries congratulating him quickly for that reason.
So we are very grateful. We are very fortunate, Bill, to have you here on our channel, that you are giving us your perspectives, Bill, on Indonesian recent political development, especially you being an Australian journalist, you as the bureau chief of ABC Australia, with all your accounts and your perspectives. So I personally wish you the very best, Bill, in the upcoming months, maybe until the next 2 years. You're still here in Indonesia,
yes.
hopefully, right?
Yes.
We'll be able to cover, of course, events that will be good for ABC Australia, for yourself.
Yes. Whatever's happening in Indonesia, we'll be doing our best to cover it.
Sure. So actually, Indonesia, in a way, if I may put it this way, that the political stability of Indonesia is a blessing in itself for the Indonesian people. At least me as an Indonesian would say that. On the other hand, that may not be necessarily so for journalists enthusiastic to see events, right?
Journalists aren't wanting things to be unstable. We're just wanting audiences back
overseas
to take more of an interest in things, even when they are stable. That's the challenge for us. That's our job.
Challenge, right?
Challenge to make things interesting. If it's all relatively stable. Yes.
Yeah, but you shall always be able to get the right angles for that, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Bill. All the best for your stay in Indonesia.
Thank you.
And then hope to meet you one day on other topics, hopefully.
Okay.
And then we'd like to hear your next experience here in Indonesia.
Okay.
Pak Bill Bertels, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Itulah diskusi kita dengan Mr. Bill Bertels. Pak Bill Bertels, Bureau Chief ABC Australia yang tentu saja berkantor di Jakarta, Indonesia. Terima kasih. Kita jumpa pada lain kesempatan. Thank you guys. Salam.